We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Aleph in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 10a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara asked, what does Rebbe do with the pasuk of Be'ulas Baal? And the Gemara said, Rebbe uses the pasuk of Be'ulas Baal to say that if a husband has relations with his wife Shelo Kedarka, so in that case she's considered a Be'ula. She's no longer considered a Besula. She's no longer considered to be a virgin. But that's only true by the husband. But if it would be a different man who had relations with her Shelo Kedarka, she still would be considered to be a Besula. And the Gemara asks from a brisa because Rebbe says in a brisa, let's say you have a situation of a Nara Hamorasa and she's raped by 10 men, and it's all Shelo Kedarka, so Rebbe said we do say that she's no longer considered a Basula. Only that first man, he's going to get the punishment of Skila, because only at that point was she considered to be a Basula, but after him she's considered to be a Be'ula, and therefore all the subsequent men, they don't get a punishment of Skila, rather they get a punishment of Chenek. So how could it be that Rebbe is using the pasuk of Be'ulas Baal to say that if it's other men, so in that situation she's still considered to be a Basula? It's not true in the Brisa. She's considered to be a Be'ula in the Brisa. And the Gemara says, Amar Rebbe Zera says, Mode Rebbe le'inyan knas. Rebbe would admit that in terms of a case where there's just a fine, let's say it's a situation where she's not ma'orasa, let's say it's a situation where she's not betrothed, so the halacha is there that if a man rapes a woman, in the case where she's a nara, there's a fine, you have to pay 50 kesef. And Rebbe would admit that in a situation of knas, to kulu mishalmi, that they would all pay the knas, because she would be considered a basula as far as the knas is concerned. Meaning, even though as far as the halachas of the death penalty, whether it's skila or chenek, so as far as that, she's considered to be be'ula, even if it's from another man, but in terms of the halacha of knas, they would all pay the knas, and she would still be considered a basula, and that's what the pasuk is being used for. She's only considered to be a be'ula in terms of knas, in terms of that area of halacha. That's only from the husband. If it's anybody else, she's still considered to be a basula. And the Gemara says, Ma'ishnam mikatola. Well, what's the difference between knas and the death penalty we were talking about in the previous Amud? And the Gemara says, Shani hasam, it's different over there. Do amar kra umeis ha'ish asher shochav imo levado, because the pasuk says that the man who slept with her levado, and we understand the word levado alone. What does that mean, levado? It means just the first man gets skila, only him, but the subsequent men, they do not get skila, they get chenek. As far as this halach is concerned, she's considered to be a be'ula. And Rashi explains, Modela inyan knas, Rebbe would admit when it comes to a fine that she is considered to be a basula, aval gavdela in ketala lo chashuv la kebasula, even though in terms of the death penalty she's not considered to be a basula, la inyan knas b'she'eno arusa. In terms of knas, let's say you have a situation where she's not an arusa, she's not betrothed and she's raped, moda dekulu mishalmi. So there he would admit everyone would pay. There Rebbe would admit everyone would pay the fine. Again, she's considered to be a basula, and that's learned from the pasuk of levado alone. Kro yiseruhu. That's an extra word in the pasuk. Tachsiv v'lenara lo sasa davar. It says you don't do anything to the woman. That's what that's referring to. Is if it was a situation of rape by a nara hamorasa, so she doesn't get punished because it was against her will. It was out of her control. Lenara lo sasa davar. That's what the simple explanation is. Levado, only the man he gets punished, but we darshan levado according to Rebbe to mean only the first man gets the punishment of skila, because after that she's considered to be a be'ula in terms of the death penalty. And the Gemara continues, V'Rabbanan hai levado my avdile. Now the Rabbanan, what do they do with the word levado? The Rabbanan on the previous Amud, they disagreed with Rebbe, and they said that all of the men in this situation, they are all going to get the punishment of skila because she is considered to be a basula. And the Gemara says, Mi boy lehu lechidatanya, they use it for the following brisa, umesu gam sheneim. It says that they both die in a situation where it's not against her will, and we understand that to mean ad sheyu shavin ke'echad divrei Reb Oshia. Reb Oshia says that they have to be the same, meaning to say they both have to be adults. Only in a situation where they are both adults, in this case of adultery, only then do they both get the death penalty. That's Reb Oshia's opinion. Rabbi Yonasan says umeiso isha asher shochav imo levado. But Rabbi Yonasan says that's not true, because it uses the word levado, that the man alone can get the death penalty, and the idea is that even if she is a minor, and she won't get punished, but he will still get punished. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yochanan hai svarim enole. Now Rabbi Yochanan, where does he learn this halacha from? Meaning Rabbi Yochanan, as we said on the previous Amud, he uses Be'ulas Baal for the general halacha that Kiddushin can be done with Bia, and so therefore he does not have Be'ulas Baal available for this halacha that only the husband, by a case of Shelo Kedarka, makes her a Be'ula, but nobody else. Where does he learn that halacha? The Gemara says, Imkein nichtov kra be'ulas ish. Well, if that were the case, it could have just said be'ulas ish. My be'ulas baal. Why does it specifically say be'ulas baal? Shma min atarti. So we actually learn both halachas. We learn that the act of bia can be an act of kiddushin, and we also learn the halacha that in terms of bia shelo kedarko, the husband specifically is the one that can render her a be'ula, but that does not apply to other men. And Rashi explains, Shneihem Shavim, they both have to be equal. That's the opinion of Reb Oshia. They both have to be adults. B'nei Onshin, they both have to be B'nei Onshin. L'mu'ute Gadol Habal HaKatan. According to Reb Oshia, if you have the man is an adult and the woman is a minor, so then the death penalty will not apply in that case. And then the Gemara asked, according to Rabbi Yochanan Hai Svara, this idea, Debal Osa Osa Be'ula Shelo Kedarka Minolan, where does Rabbi Yochanan know that it's only the husband who makes her a Be'ula if he has relations with her Shelo Kedarka? Where does he get that from? And the Gemara says he gets that from the same pasuk of Be'ulas Baal, because it could have said Be'ulas Ish, and instead it said Be'ulas Baal, and so therefore that pasuk is able to teach us two things. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, they had the following question, Techilas bia kona o sof bia kona, is the beginning of the act of relations, does that create the kinyan, does that create the acquisition, or is it the end of the act of relations that creates the acquisition? Nafkamina kagon shehere bo pashta yada v'kibla kiddushin me'acher. The difference would be, let's say she has the beginning of the act of relations with somebody, but then she goes ahead and accepts a kiddushin from somebody else. So if you say the beginning of bia creates kiddushin, so then she has a kiddushin with the first man. But if you say the beginning of bia does not create a kiddushin, so then she has a kiddushin from the second man. Inami, or there's another possible nafkamina lekohen gadol. Let's say you have a kohen gadol. The halach is a kohen gadol has to marry a basula. To kakoni basula bebia. That the halacha by a basula would be that he would he be able to have kiddushin with a basula through the act of bia? If you're going to say that the kiddushin happens immediately, so then he has the kiddushin with her immediately before she's a beula. But if you're going to say that the kiddushin only happens at the end of the act of bia, so then she actually is no longer a basula by the time the kiddushin happens, and a kohen gadol would not be able to be mekadesh a basula with bia. And the Gemara says, "Mai." So what is the halacha? Is the beginning of the act of bia kona or the end of the act of bia? Is that what's kona? Amar Amemar Mishmei de Rava. Amemar says in the name of Rava, Kol haboel daito al gamar bia. Anybody who has an act of relations, he's thinking about the finishing of the act, and therefore it is only at the end of the bia, the sof bia, that the kinyan is created. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. They had the following question: Bia nesuanosa o erisanosa. If a man has relations with a woman for the purposes of kiddushin, does that also create a nesuin? Does that create the marriage, or is it only the erisin? Is it only the stage of betrothal? And Rashi says, Bia erisin osa hamekadesh bebia. Again, we're talking about somebody who is mekadesh a woman with bia. Mihava hach bia kinesuin. Does that bia also act as a nesuin? O eina ella kashar erisin. Or is it only like any other erisin? Let's say he was mekadesh with kesef or with shtar, it would only be an erisin. So too with bia, it's only an erisin. And the Gemara says, nafkamina. The difference is as follows: Yarsha, number one, does he inherit her? Only if it's a nisuin would he inherit his wife. V'letameler, let's say he's a kohen, is he allowed to be metameter? That's only if it's a nisuin. Ula hafer nidara, and to annul her vows, that's also if it's a nisuin. Iamrit nisuin osa, if you're going to say that it creates a nisuin, so then yorsho metamelo mefer nidara, so then he can inherit her, he can be metameter, he's the one that's then able to annul her vows. V'amrit erisin osa, but if you say that it creates only the stage of erisin, eino yarsha, he does not inherit her, ve'eno metamelo, he's not able to be metamete her, ve'eno mefer nidara, and he would not be able to annul her vows. And Rashi explains, Ve'eno Yarsha, he would not be able to inherit her. Again, if it's just an Erisin, the Kaimal on Ishto Arusa, because we've established that if it's his wife who's just an Arusa, Lo Onen, Velo Metamela, Mesa, Eno Yarsha, Ve'eno Mefer Nidare Below Avia. Again, he's not allowed to be Metameh to her. He doesn't inherit her. Without her father, he's not able to alone annul her vows. So again, that's the Nafkamina, whether we're going to say that the Bia creates an Isuin or not. And again, the Gemara says, Mai, so what is the halacha? Does it create an Isuin or not? Amar Abaya says, Tashma, come and hear the following proof. Ha'av zakoi bebito bekidusheha bekesef b'shtaru b'biyah. The Mishnah says that a father, he is zoche in his daughter in terms of her kiddushin, in terms of kesef, shtar, and biyah, meaning to say again that when it comes to the money, he receives the money, he gets the money. When it comes to the shtar, he's the one that receives the shtar. When it comes to kiddushin through biyah, so he's able to give her over to biyah against her will. V'zakai b'mitziyasu v'maisiyadeh. He also merits to get anything that she finds. Let's say there's a lost object that she finds, or any earnings, any profits that she makes through her work. Uva'afaras nedareh. He's also able to annul her vows. Umekabel eskita. He's the one that receives her get. V'eino ochel peros b'chayeha. However, he does not eat the peros. Let's say she gets property from her grandfather, from her mother's side, so he's not allowed to get the peros of that while she's alive. Nisis. Now, let's say she's a married woman, so yeser olav habal. The husband actually has more control over her than the father does in the following sense, she'ochel peros b'chayeh, that he is able to have the fruits of her property during her lifetime. And in any case, the proof is as follows: katani bia, v'katani nisis. What does it say in this Mishnah? It says the word bia, and then it talks about if she's nisis. It sounds like the act of bia is only an erisin, and then there's an additional stage, another stage called nisis, called marriage. And the Gemara says it's not necessarily a proof. Kikatani nisis ashar. It could be that the word nisis is going on the other forms of kiddushin. If you have kiddushin through kesef or shtar, then there's another level called nisis, called marriage. But if you have a kiddushin through bia, since bia can also be a nisuin, so the eris and the nisuin actually happen at the same time. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Tashma, come and hear the following proof, and this derives from a Mishnah, Bas shalosh shanim v'yom echad. If you have a girl who's 3 years old and one day, miskadeshes b'bia, so she can have kiddushin through the act of bia. V'im ba'aleh yavam kanan, let's say the yavam has relations with her, that creates a kinyan. V'chayovin oleh mishum eishes ish, and if somebody has relations with her who is not her husband, so there's a chiyav because it's considered adultery, she's considered a man's wife. U'metames bo'ala, and she also is metame, let's say someone has relations with her, so she can create a tumah over there. Rashi explains, Umetames bo'ala keshehi nida. The point is, if she's a nida, so there's a 7-day tumah instead of a regular tumah if she has relations with someone. Keshehi nida shivas yamim, it's a 7-day tumah. Kedechsivu tehini dasa olav, like the pasuk says, her nida is upon him. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Amud Beis.